Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Schenectady. I am the Reverend Lynn Gardner. My pronouns are she or they, and I serve as co-minister of this congregation along with the Reverend Wendy Bartell. Wendy and I are delighted to welcome into this pulpit two fantastic retired colleagues who are members of UU Schenectady. Reverend Dr. Linda Anderson and Reverend Margie Allen. Both Reverend Linda and Reverend Margie use she, her pronouns. Whoever you are and whomever you love, wherever you find yourself on your spiritual journey, we are grateful that you have chosen to be here this morning in this good company. Whether you are arriving with a heavy heart, a buoyant spirit, a bit of both, or somewhere in between, there is space for you here, along with your worries and hopes, your questions and your determination, your grief and your gratitude.
And now, let's breathe in and breathe out and bring ourselves fully to this worship service. For this time, there's no place else to go and nothing else to do. I grew up with a very small family. In this little family, there were two parents, one grandmother, one aunt and uncle set, and two cousins. And we all lived around the corner from each other. So we saw each other a lot. My aunt always hosted Thanksgiving, and my mother did Christmas. So fast forward a number of years. My cousins and I are now in our 30s and 40s, and though we still live close by each other, my grandmother, my father, my uncle have died. My mother, who currently lived with me, still did Christmas. My aunt still did Thanksgiving. And then one year in March, my mother died. And by the time December rolled around, I assumed I was doing Christmas. I bought all the food and prepared to have the family over. And then a few days before Christmas, my cousin called me up and she said no one was coming. Hello? Really? What? Why? Because they missed my mother so much and they would feel bad to be in the house without her on Christmas. Everybody was going to my cousin's house instead. That was a very big ouch. Our theme this month, as you heard, has been grief and gratitude, and I would guess that a good number of us here have experienced the grief of losing someone or something we loved. Grieving often feels lonely, a path we travel on by ourselves. And at the same time, whole communities of people can grieve together. For example, a family is a community, and when a beloved family member dies, the family grieves as a family, as well as the individual persons in the family grieve as individuals. And that's what happened in my family. My mother was the glue that held us together, and we all missed her a great deal. My cousin had trouble holding her grief, and she didn't want to be near the place where my mother lived on. I, too, had trouble holding my grief, and I wanted others around me exactly in the place where my mother lived on. People grieve differently, even when they're grieving the same event. The community that was my family also grieved as a family, and our grieving showed in the relationships and the traditions that changed when my mother died. I never hosted Christmas again. No one replaced my mother as the glue. I was hurt and angry with my cousin after that Christmas. It took a while, honestly, to get on a more peaceful footing again. And then over time, we moved to states far away. We saw each other less and less. I will say, though, that we did regain our closeness right up until the end of her life. And I am really grateful for that. Smaller communities like families grieve. Larger communities like our community here also grieve. They grieve communal losses. Communal grief looks like individual grief, and it looks different from individual grief. But understanding communal grief can help us make our way through it as a community while preserving the relationships and the history and the traditions that we share. So, what kinds of events cause a community to grieve? Lots. The death of a beloved member, a sudden, unexpected death, floods, fires, earthquakes that damage the buildings that feel like sanctuary to so many, human hostility, violence, stupidity that cause destruction and damage. Such events might bring on a traumatic response within the community. And by traumatic response, I mean a response to an event that throws people way off balance and causes significant stress. It calls into question our understanding of how the world works or should work. One's usual coping mechanisms aren't working, don't serve well. When such an event causes this response, we call it a critical incident. And by this definition, my mother's death was a critical incident within my family. By this definition, a critical incident is recognized as such by the response it provokes, not necessarily by the event itself. So one person can be overwhelmed by an event while another person retains their coping ability throughout. Whole communities of people can be overwhelmed by a critical incident. The Unitarian Universalist Trauma Response Ministry, UUTRM, exists to help people to cope, to regain their balance and access their resilience when a critical incident occurs within our Unitarian Universalist world. The trauma ministry is made up of volunteer, ministerial, and lay people specially trained to respond to critical incidents. When the attacks of 9/11 took place, some UU ministers, including Rosemary Bray McNatt, whom we heard from, some UU ministers who were in New York City or nearby began to volunteer at Ground Zero. And while there, they realized that other religious groups had trained teams of people who would go in and help in disasters, but that Unitarian Universalism did not. And so they founded the UU Trauma Response Ministry. In the intervening 23 years, UUTRM has responded to hundreds of incidents all over the United States in our UU world. Margie has served as a responder, particularly in the response to the shooting in Knoxville, Tennessee. My first response with UUTRM occurred in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, where there was a devastating school shooting. Currently, I'm the response coordinator, which means that I consult with, support, assist, occasionally lead the responders on every call we receive. We offer crisis response to both natural and human-made disasters. So, for example, when a building burns down, we're not the people who rush in the building to put out the fire, but we're the ones standing outside, waiting for the survivors to come out to take care of them. What's it like for a community to experience a critical incident? Critical incident involves loss, and loss often brings grief. The first response of a community experiencing significant loss is very often shock and disbelief. I can't believe this. I can't believe this happened. In March of 2015, the First Universalist Church of South Hode, New York, which was built in 1837 and was the oldest Universalist church building in continuous use in the United States, burned to the ground. Most likely due to an electrical malfunction, but the building was so destroyed that they couldn't even definitively pinpoint the cause. The police and the firefighters notified the minister and the leadership of the congregation, and in the middle of the night, they gathered around the church and they watched in sadness and in horror. And sometime the next morning, the UUTRM was called. I was the lead responder. The board and the minister was stunned, and although they had a lot of decisions to make, they could not move until they had a chance to express their grief. They lamented.
Reverend Jonathan Kwong puts it this way in his poem, Abiding Anger. I need a fishbowl where I can bracket hope for a while. I need a container to let my grief fill the cup before I pour it out. I need to feel the pain, the sorrow, the crushing of my soul from racism, sexism, heterosexism, capitalism. I need to be in touch with raw anger. I need to weep until my eyes become bloated. I need to stay awake at night, sleepless from the rage inside me. Don't get me to hope just yet. Let me abide for a while with my holy lamentation.
Maybe some of you know what Jonathan means. The Reverend Elizabeth Stevens writes, lamentation is an act of self-love. When we allow ourselves to feel the pain of our own vulnerability, our fall from grace, to admit that we're down on our knees, that our efforts have come to naught, we allow ourselves to release that pain. We take enough care of ourselves to refrain from a pretense of feeling strong, of having the answers, of knowing the way home. Whether in our personal lives or in the communal life we share in this country, there is a time and a need for lamentation. The Southold Board began meeting the next morning, and that meeting lasted hours, and at least half the time taken up with lamentation. And recognizing that the congregation as a whole needed to lament, they arranged for people to gather around the burned out church as soon as it was safe to do so. And there they held a vigil of sorrow. Members of the community and other religious groups joined them. Rituals like vigils are so powerful because they bring communities together to name what happened, to name their feelings about it, and to know that others share them. They learn that any one individual does not have to hold this trauma alone. They hold it together. They learn that at the moment it might not be at all clear what they're going to do, but it will get clearer. Communities can recognize that the other side of vulnerability, the other side can be strength. Critical incidents take away the usual coping mechanisms, and leaders in a community, as well as the community itself, can feel frozen. The leaders feel they ought to know what to do, and they don't. Grief affects people emotionally, physically, behaviorally, cognitively. I imagine you know that. It's hard to think clearly or make decisions. At Southold, the UUTRM provided pulpit supply and counsel, resources, support to the board, to the minister, to the religious educators, to parents, to individuals. Neighboring congregations gave them hymnals and other worship supplies because everything was destroyed. Margie and I loaned them the chalice. The chalice had been especially made for us by the congregation in Stony Brook upon our wedding. We loaned that to them. And they liked it so much. At first, I thought we weren't going to get it back. However, about a year later, they had another similar one made because the potter happened to be right next door. They had one made for themselves and they returned ours with gratitude. We were all helpful, I think, in helping them regain stability. Lamentation and ritual provide a release for the feelings that arise to loss. Elizabeth Stevens says there's a way in which, somewhere on the other side of trauma, there's wisdom, there's gifts, there's a breaking down of barriers, there's a greater wholeness, there's a deeper humanity. But we can't get there solo. It absolutely requires a community around us, those connections. It's like the web that does the work. You know, that web, the web of interconnection of which we are all a part. A community that's experienced a critical incident needs to regain its sense of safety, and it needs to regain its sense of power and control, because disasters take that away from us, and that makes the losses worse. So here's where people from outside the affected community can play an important role, because when you are frozen and feeling vulnerable and overwhelmed, someone who is not in that state can help you figure out the next steps. There's a congregation that experienced some years ago the sudden death of its very young music director. He not only led the choir and provided music for Sunday services, he also directed a youth band. People loved him. Many, many adults and youth in the congregation were affected by it. They grieved his loss. And they couldn't make any sense of why a young person should have died suddenly. The youth were particularly stunned. The needs were great. And the ministers and the lifespan religious educator called UUTRM, and I was the responder. The news circulated on a Thursday, I think. And by Friday, the neighboring UU ministers, social workers, therapists made themselves available for anyone who wanted to come in and talk. And this gave the ministers of the grieving congregation time to regroup, be supported, get ready for the next steps. You know, as Fred Rogers says, look for the helpers. The respite time that these helpers provided gave the congregation a time to breathe. Among the people I spoke with were a high school youth and his mother. I learned that the youth band was supposed to give a concert the following evening. They didn't know what to do. They wondered if they could or they should go on with it. And then ultimately they decided that they wanted to. So I suggested that they memorialize the band leader in some way. And they came up with a really wonderful idea. The leader was fond of bow ties, and he often wore them to the amusement of the youth, who thought that was a little weird. For the concert then, all of the band members, the youth band members, decided to wear bow ties in his honor. And they did. A little thing, a little thing maybe, but a big thing too. And deciding to go on with the concert and finding a way to bring the leader into it, they took back some control over the situation. The doing something restored a sense of power, not only for the youth, but for the congregation as well. And in the regaining of control, they felt a little bit safer. The concert that evening, it was incredible. Tears, lament, laughter, love, gratitude, all of it was there. Made possible through the listening presence of their neighbors, an emotional outlet that helped the congregation to move a few steps past the overwhelm and then take back some of their agency. So I don't mean to say that they had a concert, and presto, everything was okay. It wasn't. I'm sure you know that grieving takes time and we spiral around the various pieces of it. Over the following months, room for lamenting continued. The need for help from neighbors and other professionals continued. The process of building their sense of safety and control continued. Rituals, dedicated events help. Paying attention to anniversaries and other important dates helps. Over time, they built a stronger sense of stability and learned to tap into their resilience. as did the Southold congregation. It took them 9 long years, but in October of 2024, they finally dedicated their newly rebuilt church.
Writer, activist, inspirational philosopher, and thinker Rebecca Solnit, while writing about Hurricane Katrina, said, and I quote, "What was true of the majority in Hurricane Katrina was true of most of us in nearly every disaster. We are courageous, we are generous, we are altruistic, we rescue each other, take care of each other, improvise the conditions of survival for and with each other. Institutional authority is usually overwhelmed or irrelevant or panicking, but ordinary people act with grace and solidarity. Disasters are hell, but the way people respond, the experiences they have, the way they show up for each other can create a sort of paradise of generosity, solidarity, courage, immediacy, purposefulness. The astonishing thing about disasters isn't that people behave well, respond effectively, rise to the occasion. It's that some of us, a lot of us, find in these urgent moments the sense of meaning, purpose, connection, and immediacy that are often missing from contemporary life in general. And in finding that they have, and in finding that, they find a deep joy in the most unlikely places.
Rebecca Solnit continues, I bring it up now because we are in another kind of disaster, and I see both the hell of authoritarianism trying to strip us of so much that matters, and I see the paradise of an engaged civil society responding to defend each other, defend values and principles, nature, science, and truth. Close quote. So what does all this have to do with us? I think that right now our country is experiencing a critical incident or a series of critical incidents that keep coming and together are making this giant critical incident. We experience them as individuals and we experience them in our communities as communities. Some of us may experience overwhelm, powerlessness, anxiety, fear, rage, shock, more. It can be hard to believe that this is even happening. That not that this country has ever been without discrimination and oppression, but the rapid and widespread extent of the corruption and the cruelty is touching more people in dramatically cruel ways. In this, that was my cane. In this, it's being touched in dramatically ways. In this communal grief, it can be helpful to take time for lament, to create rituals that give us opportunities to name our vulnerability, which can be scary, to express our feelings, and experience the comfort and strength of being together. It can be empowering to look for the helpers. They are there, and accept what we can of what they offer. It can be connecting to offer ourselves, if we're able, as helpers to other communities. Just like that Southold congregation, just like the congregation that lost its music director. Through such a community regains some balance, some sense of safety and control. We need this. We need balance. We need stability. We need a sense of safety and control. And one of the gifts of the No Kings protest, I think, is that it gives us that. It's not a one and done thing. It's a marathon. And I know you know that. Disasters happen. Individuals grieve. Communities grieve. Yes, it can be daunting, discouraging, and overwhelming. These are hard times. And we need not be alone. We can offer ourselves to one another. And because we offer ourselves, the experience of grief, strangely enough, also contains an experience of gratitude. As the Reverend Robert R. Walsh wrote in his poem Fault Line, when the great plates slip and the earth shivers and the flaw is seen to lie in what you trusted most, look not to more solidity, to weighty slabs of concrete poured, or strength of cantilevered beam to save the fractured order. Trust more the tensile strands of love that bend and stretch to hold you in the web of life that's often torn, but always healing. There's your strength. The shifting plates, the restive earth, your room, your precious life, they all proceed from love, the ground on which we walk. And I personally would add the ground on which we journey together. Understanding what we're going through and what we need to persist and access our resilience will make our journey together all that we need it to be. May it be so.
Her words of benediction, benediction, good word. The ones today were written by Starhawk, writer, activist, prominent in earth-based spirituality. You know it. We are all longing to go home to some place we have never been, a place half remembered and half envisioned we can only catch glimpses of from time to time. Community. Somewhere there are people to whom we can speak with passion without having the words catch in our throats. Somewhere a circle of hands will open to receive us. Eyes will light up as we enter. Voices will celebrate us whenever we come into our own power. Community means strength that joins our strength to do the work that needs to be done. Arms to hold us when we falter. A circle of healing. A circle of friends. Someplace where we can be free. May it be so.